I'm Elisa Brownlee with ALS United Mid-Atlantic, and I am the Home Adaptations and Assistive Technology Specialist with our office. And I am so pleased to introduce Charles. Say your last name for me, Poeppelman.
Poeppelman.
It's me. I can't do it. I try. So Charles is a market development leader at Synchron, advancing implantable brain-computer interface technology. He is a speech-language pathologist by training and focuses on building patient, provider, and advocacy partnerships to ensure emerging neurotechnology reflects real clinical needs and preserves autonomy for people living with paralysis. It's my real pleasure, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this thoroughly.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for being able to stick around for a late afternoon presentation and allowing this Ohio Midwestern boy to be able to talk a little bit about brain-computer interfaces. If you didn't come to a BCI talk, then you're probably in the wrong room. However, I wanted to also take a little bit of opportunity to thank not only Elisa, but Carla Patton, Stephen Spalding, Tony Heil, and so many of the wonderful advocates working at ALS United Mid-Atlantic. One of the things that Synchron has been so encouraged by over the past 2 years is the relationships that we've been able to find within the ALS community. If we're marching towards the first indication for a novel technology, as an organization, we want to endeavor to really understand what are the needs of people living with ALS, what are the needs of their caregivers, the community advocates, and the clinicians that chronically care for them. So thank you very much for being able to come and stick around for an afternoon presentation. Before I'll get into too much details, just a little bit of background on myself. So as Elisa had said, I'm a speech-language pathologist by training. I've worked over the past decade with ALS specialty clinics and AT specialty centers across Canada and the United States. Many of these clinicians being SLPs, occupational therapists, ATPs, dietitians, pulmonologists, a variety of the stakeholders that are involved in the management of ALS and working with these patients and supporting them. And beyond that, working with advocates in the community to understand what are the real-world realities that patients and their families face beyond the clinics. So many times it's those environments where patients are utilizing technologies to impart changes and perhaps improvements in their quality of life as their disease progresses. So that's been my experience, a little bit about Synchron. I'm a market development manager. What that really means as far as Synchron goes is building a new care pathway for a technology, for a novel therapy that's never existed before. I'll be sharing with you a little bit in the presentation about why that might be the case in terms of implantable BCI. It's not a new form of technology. It's actually been around for about 3 decades. However, before doing so and jumping in any further, here's some learning outcomes that I hope that you're able to take away from today's presentation. So I'll be talking a little bit about what is a brain-computer interface. It ought to be good to start there, as well as what it is that has been the Synchron approach since we were spun out 14 years ago out of the University of Melbourne, Australia. And then developing, as the presentation had stated earlier, building a brain-computer interface informed by lived experience means that you're talking and you're building upon the perspectives from the community, from the organizations that support the patients, from the advocates and the variety of different disciplines that they come from. But you're also listening directly to patients. What are the gaps that you're looking to serve for patients? We're not trying to build a technology that they have access to right now, but trying to build up one and stand that up from the ground up. And that involves listening. It involves a lot of curiosity, which I hope that you're able to walk away with, knowing that we are a very curious organization and we're endeavoring to do our best to learn from this community, to learn about this disease and all the different stakeholders that it involves. And then lastly, where we're headed next. And I hope that you're able to walk away with some hope in learning about perhaps what may be one of the very first medical device clinical trials in ALS. And really, while we're not solving for a cure for this disease, we are endeavoring to make this disease more livable and perhaps improve the quality of life for people living with ALS. So I'm going to show a brief presentation. Everything that you'll hear about in my future slides, as well as this presentation, is with regards to an investigational device. That means that this isn't approved. This isn't approved by a regulatory body. It's being studied in different geographies across the world. And I'll talk more dutifully about that as we go. So I'm going to play a short video. Hopefully it isn't too loud. We did just do a sound check. So at any rate.
What if a simple thought could empower new ways to connect, communicate, and live more independently? That question has guided Synchron for over a decade.
And we're building something we think is going to be transformative.
Synchron was co-founded by CEO Dr. Tom Oxley, a neurointerventionalist specializing in treating the brain through blood vessels.
Technology capable of streaming direct thought for people who, through injury or disease, have lost the capacity to move or speak. A brain-computer interface.
It began in Australia with a mission to develop a safe and minimally invasive brain-computer interface, also called a BCI, that empowers connection and freedom for individuals living with neurological disorders affecting movement or communication. From that vision, a small founding team grew into a world-class group of experts spanning healthcare and technology. Synchron relocated to New York, completed 2 clinical trials involving 10 participants, and published groundbreaking research in some of the most respected medical journals.
Brain-computer interface is for people whose brain is still able to send out signals, but whose body is not receiving them.
Synchron is an implantable brain-computer interface. It's designed to record a person's intention to move and transmit those commands outside the body where their limbs cannot, connecting to digital devices for communication and control. What makes Synchron unique is that this entire system is implanted without the need for open brain surgery. Our procedure is a first of its kind in the BCI space, based on decades of methods that cardiologists and neurologists have already proven safe. We implant our BCI through the blood vessels using a minimally invasive approach, similar to placing a stent. This design prioritizes patient safety and will eventually allow the procedure to be performed in communities around the world, not just a handful of elite medical centers. But the most beautiful thing about this technology is how it empowers people to be themselves. The Synchron BCI is designed to restore a sense of self and connection that may have been impacted by paralysis. At its core, our technology is about giving people control over their lives, enabling communication, fostering independence, protecting privacy, and giving people the power to make their own choices. For people who can no longer move or speak, this can be truly transformative. Sending a text to a loved one, controlling the environment around you, or directing your healthcare. These actions, which are easily taken for granted, become powerful ways to live life on your own terms. Synchron has formed collaborations with some of the leading names in the consumer technology industry, like Apple and NVIDIA, to remain on the cutting edge of what's possible. The technology is still evolving, but every interaction, every click is a step toward redefining what's possible and helping people reclaim their place in the world. Our design philosophy is simple. We design with our users, not for them. By listening to their voices through thousands of hours of research and countless conversations with advocacy groups, we're developing a device that directly addresses their needs.
It was kind of a whirlwind. I was admitted into the program very quickly and was thrilled to be involved in the groundbreaking, I guess, if you will, research and development of this, the BCI.
It's exciting stuff. I mean, I talk about it as though it's every day for the things that you do, but I still get very excited about what it can do and what it does do. And Peter will attest to this, that we will have a 2.5 hour session that will go for 4 hours sometimes, because we just go on, one more, we can do it, you know. So it's great, it really is.
Discover the future with us and join in on the journey at synchronbci.com.
So maybe we should have started here before you saw the presentation, but what you're able to hopefully walk away with that video from is that we're developing a different approach into the brain And this will get a little bit into what it is that you see on this slide, in that BCI has lived in a research capacity for the past 3 decades. And the reasons for that are multifaceted. So one is with regard to, okay, how do you access the brain? There's different forms of BCIs. Conceptually, what a BCI is trying to do is it's trying to take signal from our brain and transmit that signal outside the body to a computer to do some sort of functional task, okay? There's different types of BCIs. There's implantable BCIs that go directly into the brain. There's non-implantable wearable BCIs, as well as perhaps a new category of BCI that we're looking to build, which is a minimally invasive one. So for the past 3 decades, and the millions and millions of dollars that have existed in BCI research, it's looked a bit like this from an implantable perspective, in that it's required borehole, open brain surgical procedures. You have large apparatuses fixated to the skull. And the reason for why, from a technological perspective, why it's important to be able to look at more direct access to the brain with implantable electrodes is because it's a higher fidelity of signal. So imagine, if you will, your skull is really great at protecting your brain, at protecting your anatomy. What's difficult is when you hook up electrodes to that skull, our skull likes to reverberate and cause difficulty in being able to measure and quantify signal. So getting underneath the skull, directly to where that neural activity is happening, is really beneficial for a lot of different ways. If you're trying to learn discrete, minute signal changes that are happening in the brain, for instance, what's the difference between a patient that is moving one digit in their hand, or how our articulators work when we're talking verbally, you have to get into small groups of neurons in the brain. And so that's required a level of invasiveness to where we have to get technology closer and closer to where that activity starts in the brain. So there's always been there was an early focus about 30 years ago, 25 years ago to be more precise, in that BCI perhaps could provide some change for people that are working through various levels of paralysis. And I'll get to that in just a second. So conceptually, we all have the will to move. So when you think about raising up your hand to ask a question, when you think about pressing your gas pedal, your brain sends a discrete, quantifiable, replicable neural signal down your neuronal pathway that starts in your motor cortex, all the way down your brainstem, down your spine, to your peripheral nervous system, to your motor muscles to be able to move. And so what happens in terms of a disease like ALS is that motor neural pathway is disrupted, okay? In the term of other forms of paralysis like a spinal cord injury or a brainstem stroke, those same things occur. Something has happened to that motor neural pathway, not allowing you to move those limbs, right? So what a BCI is trying to do then is we're taking that second step, that motor transmission, and we're digitizing it. So instead of that traditional pathway going in the physical sense, we're sending it out of the body in the digital sense, okay? So from that 10,000 foot view then, what it is that we're trying to solve is we're taking that intention to move and we're bringing it out of the body in a new pathway. Now, as I had shared before, I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I've spent a lot of time working with people living with ALS and a variety of other neurological conditions with regard to the types of adaptive and assistive technologies that patients use every day. And I want to be very careful in that it is Synchron's philosophy and our approach and how we're endeavoring to bring some of this information into our industry, brain-computer interfaces, that a BCI is not an assistive technology. Actually, and this isn't even from how we ourselves categorize it. So about 5 years ago, the FDA released a guidance document in 2021, and it was the first regulatory body to do this in the whole world, to categorize an implantable BCI as a motor neural prosthesis, okay? So this is an interconnected, always-on system that is permanently implanted within the body that a patient always has access to. So a way to sort of think about this is, let's just bring up another type of prosthesis like a hip implant, okay? My dad recently had a hip surgery and had a new hip, and so he's got an artificial joint that's with him at all times. When he's getting out of his bed in the morning, when he's making his coffee, he doesn't have to think about what his caregivers need to do to make sure that he can make use of that implant. So in a very similar vein, this is a technology that can work agnostically with patients that have assistive technologies like eye trackers, voice assistants, physical switches, or in areas around the world that don't have the same, let's see, equitable access to these technologies or financial resources. There's many different inequities in assistive technologies that that I'm sure many of you already know. State to state within the United States, funding for these equipments varies greatly. If we think about globally and the different geographies in which patients are living with ALS, those inequities are even more well stated. So in theory, what we're trying to say here is that a BCI perhaps has the ability to improve upon the existing assistive technology access that a patient has. Just from a share of hands in the room, of those that have seen eye trackers before, or who in the room has seen someone use an eye tracker before? Let's just say that. Okay. So about eye tracking just for a moment. The best form of eye tracking is something called multimodal access. And that is a patient has more than one mode of accessing a computer. To work a computer, you need to do two things. You need to be able to navigate a screen, and you need to be able to select. Okay? Oftentimes, the difficulties with eye tracking don't come from navigation. They come from the ability to select a target. Many times, patients living with ALS are reduced to time-based gaze selection. What that means is we give a certain period of time, and a patient has to dwell over a target and then select that. And I'll tell you from not only my own anecdotal experience, it can be highly fatiguing, it can be frustrating to have mishits or to wait when you know what it is that you want to select. And so conceptually, a BCI would provide a patient with the ability to have multimodal access all of the time if they are using an eye tracker, because we can have them think about doing a limb movement. Even if their arm doesn't ambulate, we can assign a switch to that arm. So when they think about moving it, when they think about ambulating, their limb does not reanimate, but we can have that discrete signal be a switch perhaps for a patient. And we're learning. So in a double-blinded contracted research survey that we facilitated with 150 OTs and SLPs with at least 2 years of experience working with patients living with paralysis, we essentially surveyed a whole forte, not just these existing assistive technologies, but a whole forte of different types of technologies that patients use. And unsurprisingly, only 6% of those practitioners believe that existing adaptive and assistive technology fully restore autonomy and independence in patients. This isn't all the knowledge in the world, but this is helping us to understand, is there a gap that exists with existing technology? And this is where we're landing at as an organization. So we believe patients with severe motor impairment want to have these fundamental rights, in that the act in being able to be independent within the places that we inhabit as human beings. So however we can endeavor to build upon that independence, there's different ways that we can think about that. If a patient, let's say during activities where patients are most at risk for injury, let's think about transfers. So a patient is leaving their assistive technology setup, and during the moments in which they may endure probably the most frequent opportunities for pain, as well as needing to be able to communicate when you cannot do so because the existing adaptive technology doesn't give you access, that might be a reasonable way that a BCI that's always on and always available might be able to transmit pain as well as communication. Or what are the other factors within the household that a patient may be limited based on environmental factors? I used to always say it's a bit of a chicken and an egg game with assistive technology, because I used to work with clients that they had power blinds in their house, and they used their eye tracker to control their environment, light, sounds, blinds, and a variety of other things. But if the eye tracker can't operate the blinds to allow the patient to have access because of environmental factors, it's a chicken and an egg thing, because they need to work the blinds to have access to the eye tracker, right? So what are different ways that a BCI may be able to impact that independence is something that's a subject of our study. Autonomy. There's some really interesting work that's coming out of the International M&D Alliance that looks at what are the factors most correlated to quality of life in people living with ALS. And unsurprisingly, choice. So Autonomy really fundamentally is the act to choose and not to be a passive viewer in the life around us. So being able to be an active participant, to have choices, not just the grand choices in our healthcare decision making, the very, very small ones. And lastly, privacy. So we don't really think about privacy so much, and maybe we ought to in ALS particularly, but across other neurological diseases that cause paralysis. Who all's maybe familiar with the ICF model of disability, or you've heard about that model before? Okay, so a part of that model is participation, and another part is disability, or we could say, let's say it's ability. Okay, so as a patient has decreased levels of ability because of paralysis, we know their ability to participate in life goes down. They're inverse correlated. Privacy is also tied to that, because as we think about it, as we have a higher and higher level of, let's say, we have greater and greater challenges with the ability to participate in life, we also are more and more dependent on caregivers, people to be able to assist us and help us with lots of different tasks. And so with that, privacy is also impacted. Our ability to have private interactions. When we formulate, I was working with a patient up in Alberta that loved to do jokes to his family. But there's something to be said with existing technologies that require screens to be able to build a sentence or a message and have your co-communicator see every word that you're typing out as you're telling a joke. It's really hard to land a joke when someone sees the whole building of the message, right? So privacy can mean many things. Privacy can mean losing that ability to land that joke when I want to land it. Privacy can mean my ability to have control and autonomy over my own web browser, right? The things that I search might be personal to me. And so how do we think about neural signal that only you have as a form of locking and unlocking in terms of privacy? So different things to consider. So the solution that we're proposing is that neuroprosthetic device, essentially a brain-controlled keypad or mouse that allows a patient to be able to have control over digital devices for many different purposes, thereby bypassing that physical motor pathway that's been disrupted and providing digital access directly to digital devices. So our solution's a bit different. So Dr. Tom Oxley, our CEO and founder, is an interventional neurologist. These are stroke surgeons, essentially. They work in your blood vessels. They treat strokes. They treat aneurysms, something called arterial venous malformations, AVMs. So who all has heard, hopefully I'll have more hands on this one, who all has heard of heart stents, stenting in general? Okay, so stenting is well known. It's well practiced. Everybody's familiar with what a stent does, right? It goes into a blood vessel, restores blood flow. So over the last 25 years, the amount of open heart surgeries has dropped statistically significantly. So much so that where when patients go and get heart stents, they typically can go home the same day, okay? So heart stenting, and what I mean by this is that you don't have a whole lot of open chest surgeries anymore. Many of those surgeries are done minimally invasively by using something called microcatheters, going up either femorally through your leg or radially through your arm with these micro tools that work on your heart. These same types of surgeons, called interventional neurologists or interventional neuroradiologists, go up into the brain to treat strokes. They remove blockages, they coil aneurysms, so that this is a well-practiced, well-known structure. So I talked about how implantable BCI for the last 3 decades hasn't been able to march towards an indication. Part of that is it's very difficult to access the brain through the skull. There's only so many centers, tier 1 level medical centers, that perform open brain surgeries. And statistically, there's a lot less neurosurgeons than there are these stroke doctors that go in, and as it turns out, stroke is one of the most prevalent diseases in the world. So most tertiary and regional level hospitals have stroke teams because you have to treat a stroke within so many hours to reduce brain damage, okay? So that's what our approach, what our platform is built on, is minimally invasive stenting. So we have a stent-based electrode array that's delivered up into the brain through the blood vessels. Essentially, you can think about this like a circuit board on a stent. So neck-based access, microtube goes up to the top of the brain. We're working in the venous system, so this is the draining blood system of the brain. And we unsheath a microcatheter that reveals a BCI, brain-computer interface electrode array, that then is able to transmit the signals down a lead wire to a transceiver. Who all has seen a pacemaker battery before, or known as someone who's had a pacemaker? Okay, looks just like that. So it's like a pacemaker-looking battery that's implanted in the chest, and is able to transmit those signals out of the body. So that apparatus picture that you saw with those wires and large boxes fixated to the skull, with this system, you'd have no way of knowing that a patient had a BCI. So it's entirely, there are no wires exiting the body. It's a truly wireless system. And we think that if you want to reduce caregiver burden, you need to develop a system that is truly wireless, that can be interconnected. And lastly, the processor. So that's a computer. So a computer that then decodes. So we're not decoding anything within the body, within the system, within the body. Okay? That's important for many different reasons. One, patients aren't very keen to have processing of information happening within their body. Okay? So we send out raw brain data out of our system to then be decoded by a computer that is able to recognize that when we calibrate the system to an individual patient, it knows what the patient is wanting to do. So not only can we quantify the discrete motor signals, patient presses their gas, patient squeezes both hands, patient moves their thumb. There's a different variety of neural signals that we can decode and detect, so when a patient does it again, we know that the patient made a selection. The other part about that is, okay, so what, Synchron? This is what the FDA tells us too. So we've been able to, and I'll get to this in the next slide, we've been able to do 2 clinical trials across 2 continents, Australia and the United States. And essentially, we've been able to record something called digital motor outputs stably and across the patient that has a degenerative disease like ALS. What the FDA is telling Synchron and others is, what is the so what of that? What are the actions as a result of doing a digital motor output that are meaningful to patients? So this gets to what's called efficacy, clinical benefit. What are the reasons for why a patient living with ALS in this case needs a BCI? And so we have some theory behind this, and this is informed by the ALS community as well as many other stakeholders that have ideas to share on what things matter to patients. And what we've been able to deduce is instrumental activities of daily living. Those tasks that we all do every day within a society to be able to exist, to be able to manage our household, to be able to communicate and socialize and participate in our various social circles, to have control and autonomy and independence within the places that we inhabit. I used to say that if we think about something as simple as controlling a thermostat, okay? Well, why in the world, Charles, I'm not going to have a surgery to control my thermostat. And the argument that I try to pull back to is it's not so much the unique ability to change temperature, so much as it is the patient's right to be able to make their environment comfortable for themselves, okay? So it's not just one individual factor, it's many different facets that exist within a patient's day. And this isn't conceptual. So we have worked with 10 patients across Australia and the United States, 8 with ALS, 1 with PLS, 1 with brainstem stroke. And right now we're in the process of standing up clinical trials. We believe we have the first permanently implantable BCI trial approved by Health Canada. We're launching study in Canada, back in Australia once again, as well as we're preparing for our second clinical trial in the United States. And that's what this roadmap really talks about. So those first 2 studies, I'm so sorry for the headache that is the smallness of this text. But essentially, these first 2 studies have focused on safety. This is a first-in-category technology. It's never been done before. So we have to prove that it's safe, that patients can tolerate it, that we have really good safety outcomes, and we've continued to demonstrate that through our 10 patients. As we march towards this next phase of clinical development in the US, Australia, Canada, and other geographies across the world, we're focusing on 4 key endpoints from an efficacy perspective. We think a BCI may impact a patient's ability to have choice when they want it, where they want it. a patient's level of functional independence, a patient's level of and right to privacy, as well as, and I hope this is something that maybe brings a smile to some faces too, is to understand we know that if choice has an interconnected correlate to quality of life, then if a patient can have more choice and they can have more autonomy, what is that reduction to a caregiver, reduction of burden to a caregiver? Because we know caregiver burden is correlated to quality of life for people living with ALS. And beyond that, we'll expand access. We'll move not only throughout ALS and different M&D condition types, but we'll look at a variety of other indications as well. Lastly, and I will close with just a brief video of a patient testimonial of our patient Mark Jackson, who was involved in our last command study in the United States. But I want to end with this, and that's there's this philosophy within the ALS community of nothing with us, nothing for us without us. And so it's been our philosophy as we've entered into this space that we want to be a strategic partner of the ALS community. We want to try to endeavor to build. We don't think we've figured out everything yet, certainly, but we're learning, and we've been working with Team Gleason since 2022 to understand different technologies that patients living with ALS use. There are so many other stakeholders that are not listed on this slide that we're entirely grateful for. And on the right-hand side, voice of customer research means that we're listening to thousands of hours of patient interviews. We're talking to patients, we're talking to their families, we're trying to understand what is it that matters to patients. We don't want to be reduplicative. We don't want to create something patients already have. We're really trying to cover the gaps that currently exist for patients that are seeking more autonomy, more functional independence. So I will just very briefly showcase Mark's video, and then we'll end there.
Hi, my name is Mark Jackson. I received the Synchron Stentrode implant in August of 2023 and have been fortunate enough to be able to work with this BCI now for a while. I have been diagnosed with ALS since January of 2021. It was kind of a whirlwind. I was admitted into the program very quickly and was thrilled to be involved in the groundbreaking, I guess, if you will, research and development of this, the BCI from Synchron. Really wanted to take the opportunity, and it gives me that opportunity to give back. I know, unfortunately, that ALS is one of those diseases that there's no cure for right now, but to be involved in helping others, making it easier down the road, not just for ALS patients, but for anyone who has a neurological disease that prevents them from being able to use their arms and takes away their independence. This, to me, was a great opportunity to work with a new technology that would give some of that independence back to the individual. And so I jumped on board. And the journey has been amazing. There's been a lot of firsts. There's been a lot of some disappointments. I think anytime you do research, you've got ups and downs, but the predominant force keeping it going forward is that there are positive results that have been able to help in the independence of individuals that can't use their arms. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, to use the time, whatever time I have left. I mean, it could be 6 months, it could be 6 years from now, I don't know. But whatever time I have left, I wanted to be able to use it to help further technology, to help further understanding of how a brainwave computer interface can make a difference in not just my life, but the lives of many, many, many others.
Thank you so much. Don't know if there's any questions. Happy to take some. Yeah. So the question was, are there plans to use BCI technology with exoskeletons or other technologies like that? So, in theory, anything that could take an input method like a BCI could be used in the future. I think right now we're trying to pursue what is that first indication. What is that clinical need that is beneficial for many patients, right? But I think that's definitely not out of the equation, certainly. Yeah, so you bring up a really great point. So I think the question was like, what is the FDA, after, as far as to be able to approve our system in this case? So on the one, you need to be able to prove two things with a permanently implantable technology. You need to be able to prove safety and then efficacy. So, we've decided to take a very calculated approach in that while we're having really great safety outcomes, and we've continued to demonstrate that, we don't believe that those endpoints, those efficacy endpoints of what is a BCI going to be able to achieve, what's meaningful in this most minimalist form. You can think about the things that one person wants to do with a BCI or just a computer in general. The one thing that how I use a computer may be very different than how you use a computer. So what you want to achieve with that computer can be drastically different. And I'll talk about this in a very real sense. We have people that want to just be able to have a 24/7 call button. I just never want to be isolated. I want to be able to always send something to my caregiver. That's one need. We have other people that want to be able to drive their cars with a BCI, right? That's an entirely different level of need. And what we're trying to verify when you're building a product is, what are the needs that you're marching towards? What matters to patients? Because as it turns out, even if we get if let's say we get something approved by the FDA, it might not be what patients actually want. And at the other side of things, is what patients actually want approvable by the FDA? And what I mean by that is, even if patients want to be able to control their exoskeletons, is that a clinical need that we can prove that a patient undergoing a surgical procedure, that the benefit of that outweighs the risks? So that's sort of two ways to think about it. I don't know, does that answer your question? Yeah. So really, based on our procedural methodology, it's very similar to like the types of medical regimen that a patient that is undergoing a stroke-based procedure would receive. So like dual antiplatelet therapies, aspirin, as part of our clinical trials. It's unclear whether what actually are the types of drugs that patients are prescribed that would allow them to not be indicated for a BCI like this yet, because we're still in clinical trials. So you have inclusion-exclusion criteria, but in the future, that indication may be more broad, and it may allow a physician to work with the patient to choose. Here's your risks, essentially. Yeah, so we actually just had Rodney, one of our patients from our switch study, just crossed the 5-year threshold with his permanently implanted BCI. The vascular that we're working in is low pressure. So that also adds to the safety profile because we're in the venous system. We haven't seen any thrombosis as a result of our implant. Even if there is something called vessel patency, essentially what that means is there are thresholds, torsions that go into a vessel when a stent goes into a blood vessel. And what we've been able to see with our testing is we're so low, it's almost as if we're not even in there. Yeah, it's a great question. What was your first name?
I'm Dave.
Dave and Jennifer. So it's a great question, Dave. So essentially what a BCI does is it takes the thought of movement and transmits that outside the body to do some function that you want it to do. So, and we have to assign that. So for instance, let's say Jennifer thinks about squeezing her hand, let's say. What we might do is we might tell a computer that could be one of 5 different things, 5 different commands. So when she thinks about squeezing her hand, maybe we give her options of different things she can execute with that. And then she has a way of confirming that, maybe with another type of output. So there's different ways that we can get creative here. So to answer your question, there are ways that that output could work in conjunction with a Tobii eye tracker. We've been able to actually do that in our clinical trials, actually use a BCI in conjunction with eye tracking. But also there are completely novel ways that don't currently exist. Like for instance, when you think about Bluetooth technology, which is how our system works, if you have a car that your phone connects to, many people have that to be able to talk on the phone in the car, you don't ever have to get your phone out of the pocket to be able to have the phone connect to your car. In a very similar way, when you use Bluetooth technology, we may be able to use BCI to control a wide variety of devices in the home without ever needing a screen, because it works off Bluetooth technology. So you can think about it like, you know, what would be the DMO, the thought of movement? Maybe it's me pressing my gas pedal. And I only use this because it's an example we all can sort of understand. But if I think about pushing my gas pedal, I could assign that, and that might be a different command in the different rooms that I'm in the household. So maybe that's to turn on my lights. And I don't need any screen to be able to do that. I just need to be able to think about pressing my gas pedal, and that gives me the autonomy to make that choice. Does that help at all? Did that help at all, Dave? Explain that? So it's the thought of doing a movement. It's a really great, so there are BCI, so there's different types of BCI studies. There are BCI studies that are looking at speech-based BCIs. I'll tell you right now, those, like for instance, there's a study called BrainGate that's working on building a speech prosthesis out of the use of a BCI. Right now that requires a lot of invasiveness with the brain, so it's still an open brain surgery. Our system sits in the midline of what's called your motor cortex, which is that area that is sort of the control center of the brain. It takes getting to your language systems of your brain quite invasively to be able to decode speech. So our system could work with a communication app, let's say, right? So as another input methodology, or to be able to send out new communication signals that may not be dependent on being in front of a screen. Like for instance, during transfers, when you don't have access to your eye tracker, what messages might be important to state? Yeah, we're getting ready to launch another clinical study. It's not yet approved, so I can't talk about it, but we're in the process of getting another clinical study launched in the US. We're hopeful that it's within the next month to 2 months. Yeah. So there is a QR code here that links to our patient community. This is not a registry, it's not a trial registry. This is essentially to be open for our email communication so that as soon as we do launch a trial, if you're signed up, you'll be the first to know. Yeah, so the question was how many different DMOs, how many different motor neural outputs can a patient, can we decode, can we track in our system? So the jury is not out yet on how many that is. What we've been able to see is there's something, so our brains are always changing all the time. And so that creates challenges for decoding neural signals. What we think is that there are very high level signals that we can reliably and stably get all the time. Maybe there's 5 or 6 of them, okay? So we could link like emergent communication, the thought of getting emergency personnel or sending a caregiver alert that a patient could do all of the time. Okay, so maybe there's 4 or 5 of those that we can get. What we don't yet know is what are the ceiling capabilities of the system. How many, to your question, how many can we get out of the brain? We don't yet know yet. And I'll share, our past 2 clinical trials have been what has been a research-based system. We've spent the last 4 or 5 years engineering this system, optimizing this system to really understand what are the ceiling capabilities of recording from inside a vessel. So something we're looking forward to figuring that out. Yeah. So the question was, is there like some precognitive testing that has to take place? So as a part of our clinical trials, we do neurological assessments, we do cognitive assessments, we do pre-imaging, we look at the vessels to make sure so there aren't any surprises. We, that typically takes place in stroke-related care too. Essentially, surgeons need to know how they're going to get up to a certain part of the brain. We're working in very large vessels. This is not torturous anatomy. It's very easy to get up there. However, to your point, we have to figure out essentially what is the maximum capabilities that we can achieve with the system. But Also with that, what a patient wants to be able to do is very patient dependent. So we're trying to understand what that is in terms of people that have ALS. To also, I think you had a secondary question on, yes, that was a question. Yeah, so neural signal changes over time. So how do we account for that? So one of the things that we also have a theory on, and one of the challenges with existing assistive technologies, eye tracking, but there's others, is that their calibration is user dependent. So basically you're using your eye tracker and all of a sudden you notice that the accuracy is way off, and you as the user have to recalibrate the system. We want our system to be able to understand those changes, to be able to recalibrate on the fly, so that the system is optimized by the patient's best neural signals. So we are accounting for that and those changes in real time through decoding. Yeah. So you're talking about like different, so some of that's user experience driven, right? User interfaces. So one of the things that you saw, there's just a really brief video that you saw one of our patients using a VR headset, okay? So one of the ways that we've thought about this is, what if we could spatially identify what things in a person's room could accept a smart signal? And what if we could give the patient a user interface to be able to make selections based off of just what they see in their visual field? And we've been able to demonstrate that. So it turns out you can provide contextual information. This is where AI is helpful as a tool, because AI can help identify what are things in a patient's room. You know, in your kitchen are one set of things, in your living room are one set of things, and can we perhaps maybe even use Bluetooth technology to give contextual information of where a patient is in their house, to give them better options. There's nothing more frustrating. I worked with a patient that had small kids, and on his TV page set, he'd go to click it, but it was the wrong TV button, and he was turning his kids to cartoon channels in the other room, right? So it's a real thing. So providing contextual information, something that is also particularly exciting for me is, for those that love computers, have you heard of a term called a macro? It's essentially you can assign more than one button to do something, do some sort of shortcut for you. So there's ways that we can think about macros for DMOs, for digital motor outputs, for those signals, and that perhaps could we do a sequence? I squeeze my hand, I press my gas pedal. Is that a shortcut that I can assign to do something no matter where I am? Whether it's to control locks in the house or, yeah. So there's a broad application, so to speak, of different things that we can think about. But all of that we have to learn while we're in humans, right? While we're working with the people that are participating in clinical study. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much again for your time. Yeah, thank you.